And essentially over time, there were 5 key value propositions that sat at the heart of how Xstrata ran as a group. And in no particular order. I mean, I think the first one was that we generally did what we said we were going to do. In other words, we set out a proposition and we completed in that proposition, and we rarely overpromised. And when we did promise too early, we generally promised and made a mistake. So the thing was to have a very clear idea of what we wanted to do, tell people what we were doing, and deliver on it. And that consistency of messaging and the credibility and the veracity behind our messaging became our hallmark. So people began to trust us, both externally and also within our organization, that they never saw a variability in what we were saying. And the second one is that we essentially decided that we were going to act decisively whenever we did something. And that was a virtue in that when we took a decision, it was based on proper research, proper analysis, and then immediate and decisive implementation. Whenever we bought a company, when we identified the opportunity, we did it. So although we had a very clear idea about what strategic value and intent was, we were opportunists, but when we saw the opportunity, we captured the opportunity. When we needed to raise money, we went out when the market was ready to give us the money. We didn't wait, we didn't think about things too much. If we needed it and the market was available, we went and we captured what we needed to get. And I think decisiveness is an important virtue because it creates a level of momentum in an organization. And if you don't have momentum, you can't move forward. And if you don't have momentum, opportunities pass you by. And so being defensive is just not a virtue. And so decisiveness captures this whole thing about momentum, of vitality, of having youthfulness and the capacity to act in that way. I think the third value, which is really important for us, is that if you do all of this, then you have to actually have the capacity to take risk. You have to dare to be different, and take positions and do things which are not the norm. And we did that when we were doing our M&As, and we did that now when we did our internal growth projects. And we did that in the way we shaped our organization and how we encouraged our people to interact with the communities that they operated within. We did that in the way that we tried to develop our leadership cadre in the organization. So trying to think differently and be differently and having the courage to take risk is something which we nurtured. And when people took risk and it turned out they made mistakes, and we certainly did make mistakes, all of us, as we grew the company, we picked the people up and we dusted themselves off and gave them an environment which they felt safe and they could move on. And provided they didn't repeat the same mistake, they were in a safe place to create value. The fourth value, which I think is important, is that we took accountability. That people stood by their decision taking. So if people reveled in the fact that they had the authority to take decisions, they also stood up and were accountable for those decisions. They never shied away from their decision taking. And again, when they got things wrong, they fessed up immediately that things were going wrong, and they were not in any way concerned to do that because they knew that we valued accountability more than we valued retribution. And if they were accountable, they were going to be respected, and that there would be support around them to move forward. And accountability was both an internal focus and an external focus. That we continuously wanted people to understand the consequences of their decision making, and to accept that if those consequences took place, that was a space that they could live with and be comfortable with, both in terms of the proposition of value, the proposition of impact on communities. And the final value is that we acted with care, that we cared about the people who worked for us in our organization, and we cared about the people who were impacted by our organization, the communities we worked with, and the environments that we worked in. That's not to say that we didn't take tough decisions. That's not to say that we didn't just downsize when we had to downsize, and have tough battles with trade unions when we wanted to pay a different wage to the ones that they aspire to. And that we fought governments and we fought communities when we thought our position was right and tenable, and that we were there to preserve value for our shareholders and when we thought they were in fact undermining those propositions. But we always did that from a position of principle and a position what was right in terms of how we perceived our stakeholders would value our contribution in the whole and in the round. But we always cared about what we did. and we thought about what we did, and we thought about the impacts, and we made sure that at least we wanted to be, and in the most times we were a force for good in the environments which we operated in. And I asked those values to be respected. And if they respected those values, I was pretty indifferent to how they went about running the business.